little bit about the security, the long-term security for Bitcoin. How do you see stacks playing a role in that? I think the question sometimes comes up if, stacks can even become so successful that it might be harmful in a way for Bitcoin. So just curious about that as well.
Yeah, I think that question requires a long form answer as well. Basically, I've seen some concern in the Bitcoin circles where they're like, because stacks, the transactions on stacks are getting settled on Bitcoin. I think there's some concern that what if those transactions are so valuable that miners are kind of like fighting over it and they're trying to reorg the Bitcoin chain. So I think the short answer is that as long as the market cap of Bitcoin is actually higher than stacks, this is not going to be a problem, because you can actually do any type of reordering on the stacks layer instead of trying to do it on the Bitcoin layer, because Bitcoin would be much harder to reorg than any reorgs on the stacks transactions, right? So theoretically, this might never be a problem, because I don't expect stacks. I know there are some stacks bulls out there which would love to be in a situation where stacks is more valuable than Bitcoin, but realistically speaking, in my mind, that's a very, very low probability or no probability event. I could be wrong, but at least it's safe to say that it's not going to happen for a very, 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 very long time, potentially never. Right? So this potential attack is never going to happen. So let's even play out that is this extremely hypothetical scenario where the stacks transactions are actually more valuable than Bitcoin incentives. So what happens at that point is that a lot of the Bitcoin miners are just incentivized to also become stacks miners, right? Because they can make more money that way. So if some miners are doing it, that hey, they have some sort of an advantage that they can actually have some more control on the stacks transactions by also being a Bitcoin miner, they're financially incentivized to do it. So at that point, you just have a single set of miners, which, by the way, is great for stack security. Now 100% of the Bitcoin hash power is also mining stacks, right? And secondly, I think it leads to this dynamic where likely at that point, Bitcoin coin-based rewards have gone down to zero. Like we're talking decades into the future where Bitcoin coin-based rewards are very, very small, which means that now stacks is actually giving people incentives to mine Bitcoin, right? So it is actually a positive outcome that Bitcoin rewards became so small that people are actually trying to find other sources of revenue, but stacks is providing them those new sources of revenue. So if you play out the game theory, and I think it really, really needs to be a detailed blog post where you lay out all of these scenarios, you'll basically see that the practical case is that this is just never going to be an issue, and at least it's not going to be an issue for like decades to come. And even when it becomes an issue, it's actually a good thing. Like it gives more incentives to Bitcoin miners to actually operate the Bitcoin network.
Great, thank you. Now, the news of the week sort of seems to be a lot of folks are talking on Twitter about how there's a recent campaign from one of the Ripple executives and combined forces with Greenpeace to try and propose proof of stake as compared to proof of work for Bitcoin. And so, yeah, we just want to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think building up on the discussion on incentives, if you look at these networks that have nothing to do with Bitcoin, they're completely separate networks like Ethereum. Ethereum is the number 2 largest asset by coin market cap. Like, what if they want to grow more? What do they want to do? They want to become the number 1 asset, right? Like that's the aspiration. That's the aspiration behind the ultrasound money type of efforts and marketing and changes that Ethereum is making. Same for large projects like Ripple, right? Like Ripple and XRP has been around for a very long time. They've seen fairly high market caps. And when they look at what type of projects are bigger, the number 1 spot project is Bitcoin, right? So they are financially incentivized to effectively poke holes in Bitcoin's proof of work because it's very easy for them to try and convince people that, hey, look, this thing is wasting a lot of energy, and you should switch to more energy efficient solutions like Ethereum and potentially Ripple and so on. So I think of that as a purely incentives game. And where Stacks comes in is that Stacks cannot live, cannot function, cannot survive without Bitcoin, right? So there might be certain challenges that Stacks needs to overcome to be successful as a smart contract platform, but there's no scenario that if something bad happens to Bitcoin, Stacks cannot survive without it, right? So Bitcoin has to be successful for Stacks to be successful. That means that any developer who is actually building on Stacks, any community enthusiast, any user who actually understands how these things work, they're almost by definition Bitcoiners, and they want to support Bitcoin because their own success is kind of like tied with the success of Bitcoin. And I think that leads to like very interesting incentives, and we're seeing that play out. Like people in the Stacks community are actually defending Bitcoin's proof of work, A, because they have a much better understanding of like why proof of work is important, and B, they are naturally incentivized to see Bitcoin succeed. And I think that is actually a very important thing to consider, especially as so many different smart contract platforms are coming online, which are completely disconnected from Bitcoin. Like if you're moving your Bitcoin over a bridge to a smart contract platform, that gains nothing if Bitcoin is successful. At some point, like, they don't care about Bitcoin. Versus if you're like not only because bridges are not as secure as doing native swaps and just leaving Bitcoin on the main chain, but if you have a smart contract layer that is complementary to Bitcoin, where it can succeed with Bitcoin instead of competing with it, I think those are two very, very different scenarios.
All right, thank you. Well, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks for tuning into Stacker Chats. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure that you're subscribed to see more content like this, and let us know if you have any questions in the comments or on Twitter. Thanks, Muneeb, for being here. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.